everyone. Hello, and thank you for being here today. We are excited about our program. My name is Tracy Oster, and I am Executive Director of Downtown on the Go. And I'm really excited for the panel and for the topic that we have today. This is the second in our Friday Forum series. So I thank you very much for taking your time on your lunch hour to hear what folks have to say. And now over to Laura to get started.
Everybody, my name is Laura Sponzarek. I'm the advocacy coordinator at Downtown on the Go. I want to sincerely thank you, like Tracy, for being here with us virtually today. Downtown on the Go is the advocate and resource for all things transportation in Tacoma, and you can learn more about us at downtownonthego.org. A couple things to note: there is automated closed captioning available on Zoom, and you can click the CC button. I think it says live transcript on the bottom to turn that on. For our 2022 forum series, we are exploring the question, what does it mean to be home in Tacoma? We're diving into the link between housing and transportation. So today we'll be discussing the many interconnections between housing and transportation policies and how they impact people's actual day-to-day lives. There will be a Q&A section at the end of the forum. You can submit your questions at any time using the Q&A function on Zoom. This forum is being recorded. It'll be shared on Downtown on the Go social media accounts next week, so you can share with other folks who couldn't be here today. Now, I'd like to introduce our moderator, Tanisha Jumper. Tanisha is the Media and Communications Director for the City of Tacoma. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hope that you have a good lunch in front of you. I had to scarf down some turkey bacon before this meeting because that's how my schedule is going today. So hopefully you get a better lunch than that. I'm excited to be here with you again. And I'm looking forward to this great conversation with the panelists that we have this week, this Friday. So I'd like to invite the panelists to turn on their screens, and we're going to jump right into this conversation about how, I think last month, if any of you were with us last month, we really talked about the technical parts of transportation and housing. And today we're going to talk a little bit more about the real life experiences of how those things either complement or detract from each other, and what are some of the things we can do about that. So really excited to jump into this conversation. And so we're going to go ahead and get started. And we're going to start with, if you could just say a little bit about who you are, what you do, and, how are you connected to housing and transportation? We're going to start with Chris.
Hi, everyone. I'm Chris Karnes. I serve as Vice Chair of the Planning Commission for the City of Tacoma in the Public Transportation seat. I serve on the Transit-Oriented Development Advisory Group as well, which looks into projects like Pierce Transit's Bus Rapid Transit Project and the Tacoma Dome Link Extension. And we look for ways to improve policy and project coordination at the city. I've also served on the Housing Equity Task Force, which is a collaboration between the Human Rights Commission and the Planning Commission to emphasize equity in housing decisions. I was one of the prime sponsors of the Home in Tacoma Phase 1 map that passed out of the Planning Commission, which would have substantially expanded housing options within walking distance of transit corridors. In my day job, I'm a senior software engineer for Sound Transit, supporting real-time bus information. So I'm pretty steeped in transit and in housing discussions. Happy to be here.
Thanks for being here with us today. Kenzie.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kenzie Knapp. I am a current PLU junior, studying environmental studies and Hispanic studies, living with no car in Tacoma. I've been an environmental activist in the community with Sunrise Tacoma for a few years. I've served as the recent environmental justice director for Pacific Lutheran University Student Government, where we're currently working to expand public transit for commuter and on-campus students. And I'm a big fan of public transit in general, and I'm super grateful and excited to be here. Thanks, y'all.
Glad to see you today. Bebhinn.
Hi, everyone. Happy to be here with you today. My name is Bebhinn Gilbert. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the program supervisor for the King County Mobility Coalition, which is a part of the mobility management team at HopeLink. That's a community action agency in North and East King County. Our transportation work, however, touches the entire King County, and we partner really closely with our counterparts in Snohomish and Pierce. My work, what we do is elevating transportation to be understood as a resource which connects people to their lives, the places and the people that they want to visit, and that they need to connect to. And we're all about, what we really focus on is that options work for people, especially people with specialized transportation needs. That could be older adults, that could be people living with disabilities, young people and students. We want the choices that are out there to truly be choices. And so we are kind of in this interconnected space of transportation being this piece that is touching every other aspect of a person's life. A bit about me personally and why I'm here on this panel. I am a non-driver. I grew up in Tacoma using the 16, the 11, the 51. Lots of Pierce transit routes are familiar to me. My parents still live in the North End, and so I hop on Sound Transit buses to go down and visit them. I moved up to Seattle to attend graduate school. I'm finishing up my master's in urban planning, land use, and transportation, and I work here full time. And so I have this dual identity of a person who is living and working in King County, but always thinking regionally, because these boundaries between services really only exist on maps. They don't exist for people moving around their communities. But as I said, I'm really happy to be here and to finally be professionally talking about Tacoma, which is always a dream.
So glad to have you with us today. And last but not least, Amanda.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm Amanda DeShazo. I'm the executive director for the Tacoma Pierce County Affordable Housing Consortium. We are a nonprofit that has about 60 members that advocate and educate for the production of affordable housing across Pierce County. We are connected to transportation, not only through our partners at Sound Transit and Pierce Transit, but in this nexus between affordable housing and transportation, where we find a lot of folks that are living in affordable housing units need accessible and affordable transportation as well. So I'm glad to be here today and talk a little bit more about how affordable housing intertwines with transportation too. Thanks.
Great, thank you for being here. For the audience, if you have a question that you want to ask, you don't have to wait till the Q&A section. You can go ahead, and if someone says something that's interesting to you or that you want to dive into more, go ahead and click that Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom and ask your question. We will get to it at the Q&A section, but it also is just good to ask the question while it's front of mind. So we're gonna kick into this conversation. Let's start with you, Kenzie. Can you give us an overview of how housing and transportation intersect in your life? And I know when we first met initially, you're talking about the students and how those things kind of create limitations or possibilities for you. So
yeah, so I would say for me personally, access to transit has greatly impacted my housing and especially working conditions as someone with no car for financial and environmental reasons. As far as housing goes, one factor that I can't control as much and it most heavily impacts my housing decision at the moment is that I need to live close to my university, which thankfully I'm able to do, and my commute is just walking. But as far as work and life go, the access to public transportation has greatly expanded my options and ability to explore the town more than I would have been able to, especially a few years ago when I was new to the city. I'm originally from Bellingham, and I moved to Tacoma to attend BLU, and taking public transit for this duration of time and more frequently was definitely very new to me. So I felt discouraged at first, but getting to know the city and getting to know Pierce Transit, access to the transportation, without it, I definitely wouldn't have the same number of opportunities to work and live out my young adult life. So it's been really a journey and so much fun to get to know the routes and the city. yeah, it's very intertwined for me personally and for a lot of students and young folks.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Chris, I'm gonna pass it to you. While this might be our first time meeting, I follow you on Twitter, so I know some of your opinions and thoughts about these things. So how does housing and transportation intersect in your life, you know, in the volunteer work you do for the city, but also outside of that?
Thank you, Tanisha. In my personal life, my story actually mirrors a lot of what Kenzie is actually talking about. I'm also a non-driver, and did so also for financial and environmental reasons. And for me, I chose to locate to buy a home in an area where there was a mixture of uses, some walkable sites, walkable neighborhood districts, all of those sorts of things, and that was really possible to do several years ago. But nowadays, in most Tacoma neighborhoods, if you want to be in a walkable, transit-rich environment, you're going to pay a hefty premium for that housing at this point. And so I feel, and it's come through many other processes at the city through the Home in Tacoma process, that we've heard from the public about how important it is to emphasize affordable housing choices near these services, so that people can have options to move around and to experience their community in a way that doesn't necessarily require them to have a vehicle. At present, the city is poised to grow by over 100,000 residents in the next 30, 40 years. And so we are really trying to plan to make room in our existing neighborhoods for those additional residents, wherever they come from, if they're coming from within the region, or if they're coming from out of state. But at present, if we don't make certain choices, certain policy choices, we are already sort of at a point where some of our lower income residents have been displaced outside of the city, and when that occurs, what ends up happening is we have this displacement of people who needed those services, and now they are displaced from those services, and they are also at the same time displaced from public transportation opportunities at the same time. And so they're sort of double hit. And so I think that through our equity work at the city and through the commissions, we're really trying to hone in and learn and listen from those people who have been affected, to see what other things we can do, because there are government policies, transportation policies, which then affect what housing options you have in a particular area, and we can get into that, I think, later on in the conversation.
Yeah, I got a couple of things I want to follow up on, but I want to get Amanda in here. So, like, how does this, how do these things intersect in the work you're doing, and also in your work personal life? Like, how do you balance between the housing and transportation tensions?
Yeah, I will consider myself really lucky. I live in central / hilltop Tacoma, and we just purchased a new house. It was extremely overpriced, I'll say, and we were really lucky to get it. We had a cash, like there was somebody with a cash offer, willing to pay $50,000 over what we could offer. It was a tight market, and just thinking about where we're located and the access that I have, like I can literally walk down the street to a grocery store. I have healthcare. I could walk to my hospital if I needed to. My child will be able to walk to school. Like, there really is no reason for me to have a car and use a car. And since living here, like, my usage has been so low, which I'm very proud of myself. But thinking about folks who have historically lived in this neighborhood, in this area, the access to all of the things that I'm so proud of, it's becoming harder and harder for people to continue to stay here as the prices of rent and housing are just, phenomenally increasing. So we see a lot of the developers that I partner with in my agency, you know, you'll see them purchasing up blocks of land all down MLK now, where the new light rail is going to be going in. And it's kind of a rush from developers, right? We see nonprofit developers purchasing land, but also like outpriced by the for-profit developers. And the starkness between the cost of the affordable housing and what isn't affordable, I think like it's just astonishing now. Just thinking in terms of like people that are able to live in that affordable housing, you know, they say affordable housing is generally 30% of your income being spent on housing. They say affordable transportation is like 15% of your income being spent on transportation, but we're seeing anywhere from 25% of your income actually going towards transportation. And thinking about, if you're low income, the second highest expense you have is a car. You don't want to have to, be forced to live somewhere that's super expensive and then also have the cost of a car. You can save money on put more money in your pocket to spend on groceries, your healthcare, childcare, education, whatever it might be, if your housing is located next to transit. So yeah, just in general, thinking about affordable housing and where it's being placed, it's so important that we are building housing and keeping housing affordable close to transit and not displacing residents that are here that are reliant upon it.
Yeah, it's such a great point. Let me get back to that. Hey, Bebhinn, glad you came back. I was scared for a second.
Oh my goodness. Yes, I am back.
It's the world of Zoom. But so how and we talked about a little bit when we first met as well, like how do you see, housing and transportation intersecting in your work and life, both from your personal experience and the work that you're doing?
Yeah, thank you. I really see both of these questions, the question of where to live and how to get around, as a question of access and a question of true choice. With the community members that I work with most closely are often folks who, as Amanda has pointed out and as Chris pointed out, have had to move to different neighborhoods that have the affordability that they require, and yet the locations that they want to go, the places that mean the most to them, whether it's a community center or a loved one's house or a park or wherever they're headed, those are static locations. And so when I'm talking with my clients, when I'm talking with community members, it's often around, how do I get to the places I'm most familiar with? How do I have a sense of self and community in this new location? And really the kind of bridge between that is, how am I going to get there? A lot of the folks we work with, a lot of the folks that I hear most directly from are people who are making a decision to become non-drivers. So older adults deciding that they no longer want to drive themselves from A to B and instead want to transition or need to transition to relying on a volunteer-based service or a community network or a public transportation network. And I see these things, the housing and transportation intersecting in this idea that you have to have options available to you. When you don't have options and a true choice, then you're stuck staying in one mode, staying in isolation, or feeling disconnected from your community, or being priced out of your community, or paying or being overburdened, as Amanda pointed out, at over 30% of your income or over 25% of your income for transportation costs. And that interconnected nature of these two options is also, we can't get away from the fact that these are incredibly personal decisions. And so having networks that are robust, that are overlapping with each other, help make that choice more reliable for folks. I was going to get into this a little at a later question, but this idea of a baseline of service is also right here at the edge of this conversation of transportation choices no matter what they are, should be easy, should be accessible, should be reliable, so that you can rely on them, right? A 45-minute wait for a bus is not an equal choice to hopping in your car. At multiple transfer points is not an equal choice to calling for a ride from your loved one. And yet they're all part of how we stay in community with one another. So I hope that gets to your question. If I jump out, I want to end on something poignant like that.
Yeah, no, I think, this is the point where I go off script. So, I think, I think that some of what you said is so important. And it struck me as you guys were talking, it's like, I'm talking to, 4 people who are choosing not to drive. And for some people that seems like, well, that's your choice. And that's not my life. And I'm not going to participate in that. And there are there's real things to that, right? I was a working mother with 3 kids who played sports. I do not know how I would have ever managed that without, having a car where I could pick and drop off and go home and make a snack and bring it back, and all the things that I had to do to manage that, right? But there was something compelling enough for you all to make that choice. And I'd like you to maybe just talk about making that choice, and then what are the other choices that follow that choice. So like, if you got to like move, well, I guess you run a U-Haul like everybody else, but if you got to take some stuff to the dump, or if you got to like, I don't know, the things that I take for granted, like I don't have to think twice about going to Costco. I also sent all my kids away to college, so I don't need to go to Costco anymore. It's great. But there was a point where I needed 500 fruit roll-ups. So let me, like, whoever wants to jump in first, like, what are some of the trade-offs and some of the decisions you had to make to get to that point, and what were the things you had to weigh to decide, like, I can do this, or I absolutely can't do this? And Kenzie, I see you nodding, so I'm gonna pick on you first.
This is what I get for being very expressive in every space I'm in. Let's see. I would have to agree. It's definitely not easy, and it's not an easy decision. There does take some amount of sacrifice, especially in time and in waiting for the bus and taking the bus. But I would say, yeah, sacrifices. I definitely do still rely on friends and family for carpooling for those, like, because I saw a question in the chat that said, like, what do you do when you really, like, there's no way out of it? And there certainly are those times. And thankfully I do have folks I can rely on to carpool and be there when that's needed. But I think finding a routine and finding a routine in your schedule to take that bus and know when it's coming has definitely helped me prepare and kind of minimize how much of a burden that I might have once thought it was. And now kind of almost romanticized it. I love taking the bus. But yeah, I would agree. It's definitely not easy, but it gets easier is what I would say. Yeah.
Yeah. Amanda?
Well, I have a car, so I do still rely on my car for some things, and I have a 6-month-old, so it makes it, there's just times where it would be really, really difficult for me to not have a car. But I can say that it definitely played, where we purchased our home played a part in like my decision, being able to, walk accessibly to the grocery store and the hospital and the park and the school and all of that stuff. But it's definitely like, it's a benefit. I grew up on the east side of Tacoma, and the closest line to me was the one, and I was actually I was living without a car at the time. And like Kenzie said, like, yeah, you have to build up that routine. And it just kind of led me down this thought train of like, I remember being there waiting for the bus, and I had to make sure that that bus came on time every single time, or I was going to be late for work, which then like would impact my job and me being in trouble for, not being on time. And I think a lot of people, when we're talking about transportation, we need that, and we need the consistency of the bus schedule in the accessibility for everyone to be able to get on the bus when they need to. We're seeing that less and less, like further outside of Tacoma as well, which is kind of a disappointment as people are being pushed, and displaced from Tacoma. But I'll say, like, I still use a car. I need it for having a child. But when I can, I take the opportunity to walk. That's my choice.
Yeah. I mean, so Chris, I'm gonna come over to you and then to you next, Bebhinn, but I'm gonna add a little bit to the question, because I know that like both of you are working in organizations that are dealing with these issues, and we talk about, the choice, like, you guys have the ability to choose to not use a car, but there are people that have medical reasons why they can't drive. There are people who get to an age where driving is just no longer safe for them. And I don't know that we always talk about them in these conversations, and what happens when a community doesn't have these systems or have the right housing and the right transportation options in tandem so that people can live. And I know that's one of the things that you guys were working on in Home in Tacoma, but just wanted to, Chris, kind of get your thoughts on that too.
Okay. Okay. So that's a good addition, I think, to the discussion. For me personally, I think I got started riding transit when I was in high school. So initially it was a question of making sure that I had enough money to be able to ride the bus that I would get from my parents. So they started me out with a summer youth pass for 3 months, and it was $27, and it's still $27 this year, even so many years later. From growing up with the system, I think what I learned was that you had to find ways to make the system more resilient. And so what I would do in addition to using the bus is I would also ride a bike, because that can provide a similar level of transportation. If the bus isn't running, or if that's just not going to work for a particular schedule, you might be able to sort of gap fill with that mode. And as time has gone on, I have had I have the means to at least to be able to take advantage of certain things like delivery services and transportation networking companies, so Lyft or Uber. When I do need like a direct point-to-point transport option. When it comes to Home in Tacoma and taking into account sort of the needs of people with disabilities, seniors, veterans, one thing that we really tried to focus on as a part of that work was to really understand, okay, how for walking distance for able-bodied people is generally considered to be like a 5-minute walk, or it's roughly a quarter mile. But for anyone else, someone with a walker or a cane or small children, that distance may be smaller. And so trying to understand sort of what is then accessible transit, and what design features need to go into more housing that's closer to transit, were sort of identified as a component to study in phase 2 that came back from feedback that was in phase 1.
My keyboard was doing something weird, and I realized I had stuff on it, so that would make it hard to type. Bebhinn, no, Chris, I mean, I think what you said is really, really important. And Bebhinn, just, I know we talked about it a little bit in our introductory conversation, and what's the proportion? I think that's another thing we don't talk about a lot, about how many people we assume everybody has access to a car, and it's a really small portion of people that need transportation. And what's that real proportion?
What's the real proportion? And that's baked in, I think, a lot into a lot of the the assumptions that are at the Puget Sound Regional Council. They come up with a number of what what they expect the vehicles per household to be, and it's supposed to trend down over a period of time. So not every. So let's say you have two individuals who are living in a housing unit. You don't necessarily need two vehicles for that for that particular unit. It could be a one driver household or a one vehicle household, or it could be a mixture, or it could even be someone who actually, that was one change in state law that happened recently that we implemented on the Planning Commission side, was for for senior housing, to lower the parking requirement for that, because in general a lot of people who live in senior housing rely on either on shuttle services from Pierce Transit, or community vans for mobility purposes and for access to medical care. So there are lots of different ways that you can meet accessibility and mobility needs, and it doesn't always have to be through a vehicle. And I think the city is trying to do its best to move in that direction.
Thanks. Bevin, you want to jump in here?
Yeah, I'd love to. Love to build off what Chris is talking about. A big part of the work that my team does is helping to expand the kind of assumptions around transportation options. Pretty easily, it can be seen as a binary, right? Like either I drive or I take a bus. There are so many more resources out there. Several that come to mind right now kind of address the specialized transportation services that bridge between both a community support network and a transportation service. And so there are nonprofit-based neighborhood shuttles, volunteer-based programs that match a person to someone who can essentially be their carpool. What we're seeing in kind of the in-between space between public transportation and mobility as a service are these kind of on-demand services that are coming up in our region. Something that you can make a quick call on your phone, or download an app and hail a service and access that service, similar to an Uber or a Lyft, but at the price of a bus ride. And so those are really interesting options that kind of broaden this idea and again make a choice more accessible. For myself, so I know this is where this question started. I am a non-driver. The decision initially was one of cost. I grew up in a family that could not afford to pay insurance costs for all the children. And so we just didn't learn how to drive. And then I went to college in Seattle, which has a reliable transportation network. And I walked and I biked and I got around. But just as Chris is saying, there are we are a broad and diverse community. There are folks who are non-drivers because of limited personal mobility, a disability, age, or they're like me and they simply choose not to. With that, the work that I do, again, we focus on folks who are specialized transportation users. That's older adults, that's veterans, that's young people, students, that's folks who are new to our community because they are immigrants or refugees. And so it's a huge umbrella. Really, really quickly, we see that the transportation user, the specialized transportation user, is a definition that a lot of us with our intersecting identities actually fall under. I want to say the latest Puget Sound Regional Council data that I was reading had something along the lines of 43% of our community fall under that umbrella definition. And again, it's a broad umbrella, it catches a lot of folks, but that I think is a really helpful tool for broadening folks' ideas of what it means to have a transportation network that works for all people. It's not a niche service that we need. It's a pretty universally accessible tool that again opens up communities, connects communities. for any transportation planners in the room, this might be a little bit of a cliche story, but I always like to, I remember an early professor of mine told me about the ice cream access, and that, you know, when you live in a connected community, when you can think about moving from on your couch to on your couch with ice cream in hand in, you know, less than 15 minutes. So what's that process look like for you? Does it mean, you know, getting up and walking to your local, Salt and Straw, or does it mean hopping on the bus, or is the ice cream going to melt on the way home, right? So I love thinking of that, because that visual is so, you know, you don't want it to melt in your hand. You want to be able to enjoy it. But yeah, this idea that transportation, again, and I apologize to be repeating myself, but it's often made invisible when it's accessible to you. And the idea is to raise it to the forefront, have it be part of interconnected conversations.
Yeah, I used to say all the time when in my last career working in social services, that services are working really well when no one even knows that they're happening. And there's a lot of things that you don't know how much you need them until they are absolutely not available. And I think, you know, when you think about the kind of community we want Tacoma to be, what the way when we want Pierce County to be, we want people to be able to stay here for as much of their lifespan as they want to, right? And so, you know, being able to age in place, which encompasses both transportation and housing, the ability to not have to either maintain a house that's way too big for you, costs way too much into your, you know, later years because you can't afford or you can't find something to downsize into, or if you need transportation, I have to move to a completely different neighborhood to be on the one, or what, like if you don't have a car, that the fact that you can't choose, no, I've lived here, my social network is here, I want to stay here, I just want a smaller place here, and I want to be able to get to where I need to go from here. That's a really limiting choice that without thinking about it, we could be doing to people over and over and over again, especially with the status we're in with housing, and how it's really hard to find, you know, to downsize, that we don't have that that we kind of are missing that missing middle housing. There's not a lot of options and choices and stuff. So that kind of leads me to, and we've got two students that are, you know, currently, you know, on this call. So I'm going to start with you two. But like, we have a lot of really, you know, amazing universities in Tacoma, Pierce County area. We've got three or four in Tacoma, and you know, these are really impactful issues for students, especially with UW-T and Evergreen both being kind of commuter campuses. You know, what are the options, or how do these things impact, you know, the experience of being a student in a community where affordability is such a problem, and transportation maybe not as great as we would like it to be. And Kenzie, I'll start with you, and then Bebhinn, maybe you could talk about your experience in Seattle, you know, in comparison to the experience in Tacoma. So, Kenzie.
Yeah, thank you, Tanisha. I would say, yeah, transportation greatly influences student choice as far as housing, employment, and school. Especially at PLU, we're in Parkland, so the bus from getting to the stops and getting, I've definitely noticed a negative connotation, at least in my, just yell at me if my connection is not working. But I've definitely noticed a kind of negative connotation when it comes to local transit, especially because of this time factor. Although last week I learned from one of our panelists here that the average commute by car is about anyways. But I still think this conception and other factors, such as taking public transit in a pandemic, can be very discouraging for students. for those reasons. For me personally, when I arrived on campus freshman year without a car, I also felt very discouraged by that distance, and almost as if I was trapped on campus and in the very near community, because I wasn't used to taking public transit and I didn't have any friends with cars at the time. So I definitely felt like I was just kind of isolated in that community. Not that that's bad, but I definitely wanted to explore and live out that first year. But thankfully, since last summer, I was able to get a job near the Tacoma Mall, and kind of like I was saying, I finally found which got me there and back every day. And this practice of this commute made me a lot more comfortable with taking public transit regularly, and made me realize how fun it can be. I'm one to blast my music and pretend I'm in a movie or a music video of some kind. And yeah, I found transit to be something I really look I found it to be something I really look forward to in that daily routine, romanticizing that. But yeah, it definitely impacts a lot of students' thoughts as far as getting to where they need to go as far as work and life. Yeah.
Yeah. Bebhinn, how does that, compare to your experiences in Seattle? And I have a young person who lives in Seattle, and she opted to give up her car because she wanted to be able to live in a nicer place. And she was like, I can't do both. And so she's been without a car for now 3 years. And I mean, she's made it work. And I think it's because the systems in Seattle kind of work. I don't know if they work perfect, because I've not ever been without a car. And, it never occurred to me to, I lived in Ohio for a long time. If anyone is upset about Tacoma's public transportation, go to Ohio for a little bit. You'll learn some things. But Bebhinn, what's your experience been?
Sure. I would say I resonate with what Kenzie was sharing. The sense of isolation when you're a non-driver, or sense of isolation when you're in a new neighborhood, let's just move it to just housing purely, is really is a barrier. You want to feel, everyone wants to feel connected to the place that they're in, that they're spending time in. And again, transportation is kind of that unseen connector piece. When I was first moving to Seattle, which at this point is, gosh, 12 years ago, so quite some time ago, it was, part of my finding a sense of identity was riding on the bus and figuring out what as Kenzie said, what music video I wanted to pretend I was part of, because that resonates. I think it's beyond too just the student experience, something that we see in several cities, but I would imagine in Tacoma and Seattle, something we have in common, besides the rain and the gray, is this idea that neighborhoods are really specified to their surrounding resources. And so, in Seattle, right around the University of Washington, it's student central, but with robust transportation choices, whether that be public transportation, nonprofit-based services, or whatever combination of any choices that you want to make, you can see a more integrated community, and you can have that connection to not only fellow students, but people who are working professionals, older adults, that kind of integrated community, integrated in experience, integrated in diversity. That's what transportation choices and housing, when they work well together, can offer us. Having these sense of place, having a sense of belonging in that place, access to the grocery stores you want to have access to the places of worship that you want to access. Those are all, again, not specific to the student experience, but that's about finding a home, right? That's about finding a city you want to live in, a neighborhood you want to live in, and all of that has to do with how you get there. So, now I find myself in North Seattle near the new Sound Transit Link Light Rail, which is amazing. I find myself really lucky, and it makes me hopeful for future expansions that are happening in our community, as long as those expansions can be thought of in a complete way, thought of in a complete neighborhood way, right? So that everyone can find a spot that is close to the options they want.
So we've talked a lot about transportation, and I know that like housing is a key part of this. So Amanda, I'm going to come back to you and kind of, what are some of the decisions that you maybe see need to be made around housing, and maybe some of the levers that need to be pulled to make that work? Because I mean, at the end of the day, if you can't afford to live here, it doesn't matter how great our transportation is, you can't live here. So and Chris, I'm going to come to you next. So Amanda.
Yeah, Chris, I won't steal too much of your thunder about missing middle, right? But when we think about like Tanisha, you talked about people, as people age and like wanting smaller homes, and versus like college students needing to like cycle up into a bigger home when they have a family. We need to definitely address the availability of housing and housing types, especially around transportation corridors. When we're talking about building housing specifically, we have to think about things that, affordable housing exclusively, when we're thinking about things in terms of cost, even to just build the housing. There's not a lot of land available in Tacoma, like downtown Tacoma proper. And so Tanisha, you'd asked me before about like parking, right? Like when we think about parking and transportation, and I was like, I'm going to get back to you. So I found out that it's about $50,000 per unit cost just to add parking into a multifamily development, which is insane. So it adds $50,000 per unit. Which really, like, building affordable housing is so hard as it is, and getting the funding and the local sources of funding to build that, like adding on the parking for that is just astronomical. I do see some really great things happening. Pierce Transit, actually, they're a member of ours and have been reaching out about a program that they're doing with multifamily developers, offering orca passes at a discounted rate to landlords who then can pass that on to their residents, to be able to use them to get places in lieu of parking. And then just thinking about like the zoning codes, and there's just so much, there's so many levers to pull, right?
Yeah.
But I'll let Chris kind of go into missing middle and transit and housing equity too, because I know you're sitting on that task force, and that plays such a big role as well. I'll let you take it over, Chris, if you want to.
Sure. Thanks, Amanda. No, that tees it up quite a bit, and that's really missing middle housing is it's housing that it's bigger, generally considered bigger than or within the sort of the same footprint as a single family house. So you think of things like duplexes and triplexes, maybe a fourplex. Or small apartment buildings, but not necessarily the large sort of 4-story or 4-story over a 2-story like parking pedestal structure that you might see in a mixed-use center or in the downtown area. And so the issue with land use in the city of Tacoma is that currently even though Home in Tacoma Phase 1 has passed and we're now looking at building regulations and building standards for adding these new housing types, currently really the only thing that you can construct in much of the city of Tacoma when it comes to housing is still the single family residence, and so we're sort of tapped out in terms of what we can construct with that. We now have the ability to, as residents, to if you own a piece of land, you can construct an accessory dwelling unit on that piece of land as well, which does add to some housing choices. But there's only so part of what Home in Tacoma Phase 1 looked at was we developed a housing action plan, and in that plan we looked at affordability rates at different area median income. So 0 to 30% would be very affordable units, whereas the 80%, if you're making 80% plus, that would be sort of more of a market rate units. In order to sort of meet demand sort of across the board, we just need a greater diversity of units of different types. So if you want to, maybe not everyone needs a large single family house at all times of their lives. And so if we can have that diversity and build in some additional choice and affordability options, either in terms of size or location, it can really, the projections show that we have the ability to produce the number of units for the people that we see coming into the city. And where we see, I think, the majority of the benefits of, let's say, duplexes and triplexes, that actually helps to improve affordability in the ownership market. Whereas in the rental market, we see the addition of potentially fourplexes and small apartment buildings as potentially reducing the overall reducing the cost of housing for renters. And so when you pair sort of the addition of housing choices plus additional transportation choices, those two things combine and then sort of make the neighborhoods more affordable citywide. And so that's really kind of what we were trying to get at in Home in Tacoma. And it's, we still have another 18-month process to go through to implement. But it's but we've gotten the go ahead from council to begin that work and to begin that community discussion.
Yeah, thank you. So we're getting close to our time. We've had a great conversation, but I kind of want to wrap up by asking you, like, what are the things, if you had your wish list, if you had your like top 2 things that you would like to see happen from either your personal perspective or your work perspective to improve this this nexus between the two, what would it be that you'd want to see? And we'll start with Bebhinn.
Baseline level of service. I'd love to see at most a 10-minute wait time for any transit option, and I'd love to see a system that makes it easier to find all of your options. Again, there's more than just driving and busing. There's so many choices out there that are community-based, that are relationship-based, and it should be easy for a community member to know all of those.
Yeah, that'd be great. I remember my daughter went to University of Kentucky, and they were trying to do like car trip reductions there.
Yeah.
So they would like, if you had a car, rather than getting a parking pass, you could leave your car and get a bike. And that was part of like your admissions packet. You got to choose. And if you took the bike, you got to keep the bike. But it was their way of like incentivizing and saying like, it's going to be hard to get around Lexington. It's easier to walk around Lexington than it is to drive. So turning your parking pass, get a bike, done. And it would be great if we had more things like that. So Kenzie, thoughts?
First of all, I'm jealous of that. I would love for all of that option to be available everywhere. Oh man, I would say as far as from the student perspective, I know of other schools where your student ID is your bus pass, and that would just like be a dream. Currently it is $2 one-way trip for 19-year-olds and up, and that can add up pretty quickly for some folks, especially I mean myself included. And so my dream would be for your ID to be your bus pass, but not just for students. I would love free transit everywhere, of course, make that much more accessible for everyone of all income levels. Yeah, that's the dream.
Thanks. Amanda?
Yeah, I'm just like scribbling down like, oh man, I have so many wishes. But I'll give you my top three. Okay.
Okay,
So
all right.
first and foremost, like always, like increasing the number of affordable units. Like that's going to be my top one. And then definitely like increasing the number of affordable units around transit and vice versa. And increasing the incentives of building affordable housing near transit. And those partnerships that happen between Sound Transit and affordable housing, Pierce Transit and affordable housing, like I'm lucky to be in those conversations, and they're working with local developers to kind of figure out what this can look like and where we could place affordable housing. That relationship is it's just amazing. And so my third thought was like, you know, these conversations about affordable housing and transportation, like they need to happen more often. I work with a lot of developers, like they sit on my board, and we really don't talk about transportation and access to affordable housing, right? We talk all the time about where housing is going to be placed, but where, like, are we thinking about access to transit when we're placing those units? And how does that play into the broader community and what we hope to see in Tacoma in the future? So those are my top three.
Great. Chris?
Yeah, thanks. I'm going to piggyback off of what Bebhinn stated about the baseline level of service. So I think what needs to happen is that Tacoma needs to set a standard for how frequent and expansive the transit system should look like, and then measure the gap in between what our service is now and where we want it to be. In order for us to do the kind of transit-oriented development at a a moderate neighborhood scale, and to have it work, we need to have those service levels at least 15 minutes, if not 10. I'd love 10-minute service, but even 15-minute service it's a good baseline, I think, for what a lot of people consider to be frequent enough to be able to really consider it as an option. And one thing that the city of Seattle does is it actually tracks the percentage of the population in the city that is within walking distance of service to, that meets that standard, and they track that each and every year, and they take actions to improve the percentage of the population that has that. So it continues to grow the system over time. And as as the population increases, it improves the operating conditions for transit. You actually require less operating subsidy per passenger, and the system can grow sort of on its own organically. I think the second thing I would say is that that I think that Tacoma in general has left transit operations and planning to the transit agencies, but hasn't really sort of directed the agencies as much about what specifically the needs, what needs do they want emphasized. And in Seattle, there's the use of something called a transportation benefit district, where there's actually a direct funding source from the city to the transit agencies to fund those priorities. And if you sort of take those two things, the standards, priorities, and funding, you put all that together, you really can sort of make progress on the issue, and not just sort of talk about it for so long. You can actually make real headway and improve conditions for everyone who needs affordable housing or not in the entire community.
Right. And I think it is also one of those things where, like, in some of the older cities that have kind of wrestled with this and have bigger populations and have had to make those investments, public transportation isn't just a tool for affordability, it's a tool for convenience. And I hear people, I'm the communications director of the city, so I hear lots of things, but people really frustrated about like the lack of parking, or that they don't think there's enough parking, which I am like, well, go to New York and find a parking space, and then we can have a conversation about parking. But even with the fact that Tacoma is somewhat developed a little bit like an urban suburb, and people expect to be able to park right in front of the store that they're going to, and, not have to do a whole lot to search for a parking space. I think when cities get to a certain level of density, there is a point where you're like, driving is more of a pain than not. There's certain parts of like Portland that if you want to go out to eat, it's easier. You'd rather pay the $40 for the Uber and then just get dropped off at the door than drive around the block and have to parallel park on a street that's this wide, and like just all the things that come with, that you make different choices. And I don't think we've quite hit that point yet, but it would be great if we could hit that point thoughtfully and not reactively. And I think that's what these conversations really do, is allow us to have a conversation about what do we want to be, so that we can create that, instead of being like, oh shoot, we're here now, and now we got to try to retrofit the solution to where we're at. And so I really appreciate all of your conversation. I know Kenzie has to leave us a little bit early, so I'm going to try to jump into some questions so she has a chance to weigh in on them. And I'm going to start with Ryan submitted a question. Which Tacoma neighborhoods or business districts would you consider to be good models for the rest of the city, and what elements of transit services make them good models? Who wants to jump in first? I can see you, Chris. I can see it on your face. You got ideas.
Great.
You got
Thanks, Tanisha. I believe this actually comes from fellow Planning Commissioner Ryan Givens. So I used to live in the North Slope Historic District. It was originally a streetcar suburb. So there were, I think, 3 different streetcar lines that ran through the district. So back in the 1930s, or back between essentially the founding of the city up to the 1930s, that mixture of uses, that sort of fine-grained sort of pedestrian pattern, block pattern that had a lot of diversity of housing types. There were apartments. There were houses the size of apartments, or of apartment buildings, but you would also have apartment buildings right next to those large houses. So there was just all of this diversity and mixture of uses that really still works today, and it's still actually part of sort of the DNA, I think, of the city of Tacoma. It's different from the development pattern that you see maybe on the West Slope or in Northeast Tacoma, but it's like a blueprint that you could see potentially replicated in other areas of Central and South Tacoma without a whole lot of modification, maybe some incremental change over a 25-year period. You could get to the same level of density and convenience as you would find in the North Slope or on Lower 6th Avenue.
Anybody else have a neighborhood that they think works well and would like to see replicated, or more communities like it, more neighborhoods like it? All right. Well, we had another question from Sean, and I think this question is probably more geared towards Amanda, but we hear a lot about like 80% of area median income for affordable, and in this community, this level of income in our market is really more like middle class. What is being done to build housing addressing the truly low income households? And I think that's a really top of mind question, because people react every time we say we're doing an affordable housing project at the city, and those numbers aren't set by the city, they're set by HUD. And so just maybe weighing in on what's affordable and what's like really low income housing, or housing for people who have lower incomes.
Yeah, I always think of it in terms as like a continuum. So, we go from 0 to 30, 30 to 50, 50 to 80, and then 80 and above. And I know a lot of the affordable housing that we see that's being built, mostly with like the multifamily tax exemption and those units in there around like the 80% AMI. Yes, those are set by HUD. The median income prices are set by HUD. When I was thinking, sorry, Sean, I was writing, I was trying to like type your, answer your question in the chat. And then I'm like, this is really long. So my agency, like we specifically work towards developing more of that 0 to 30% affordable housing. And it's a challenge. There's a lot being done to try to address that, but I don't think a lot of people are aware of just how much work goes into doing one of those projects. A lot of the times, so you'll see like those projects for 0 to 30% AMI are built by nonprofits. The amount of subsidy that it takes to build those affordable units is astronomical. So we are constantly advocating with the cities, the county, the state for more funding to go towards that affordable housing. But at the same time, we're seeing those costs increase, right? So we want to see more affordable housing built around transit. Well, we know that the cost of land in those areas is going up. We see with COVID, the cost of the material that it takes to build that is going up. Labor is going up. So constantly, like in order to get the subsidy that we need to build those units, we need more money. And something that I think often goes overlooked too is like the services that go into these housing developments for that 0 to 30% AMI. A lot of the times they need operating subsidies. So it's not just the development, but how are you going to support the people that live in these developments after the building is built? And often like operating subsidies are something that are really hard to come by, and why I think Pierce County is so slow to build a lot of these units. We just don't have the operating dollars. Pierce County just passed our mental health tax, which a lot of the folks that are building these like permanent supportive housings can now utilize to utilize for those operating dollars. But we hadn't had that. We're the last county that actually passed the behavioral health tax. And so it's just, there's all of these nuances that go into it. Not to mention like tax credit financing. The IRS is actually the biggest developer of affordable housing in the United States. And we depend a lot on tax credit financing. Pierce County gets maybe one tax credit project a year to build that deeply affordable housing. So there's issues like at the state, city, county, and the federal level, like that we're all watching to see like, how do we get more subsidy to build those deeply affordable housing units? And in the meantime, we're working with City of Tacoma to try and address this, not just through funding, but through the action strategy plan that they've been carrying out, which has been amazing. And it's touching so many different areas. So you're looking at funding, but you're also looking like, how do you protect the tenants that are actually living in those units? How do we make sure that naturally affordable housing is staying and being maintained so people don't have to be displaced? I have so many answers for you, Sean. If you want to email me, like we could talk about this all day, but it's my passion. And I just want everybody to know, like, there is stuff that's being done. It's just not really in the forefront of people's minds because there's so much behind the scenes. It's such a convoluted conversation to have because there's just so much. So yeah, I'm here to help if you are interested in actually participating in the consortium. I'm going to do a shameless plug. You can go to our website and sign up, and I send out a newsletter to try to keep people updated. And our website is tpcahc.org. Okay, I'll stop there.
That's great. I mean, that's part of what this is about. It's like, how do people plug in? There's some comments in here about people like that. This is a really important conversation. I don't know where to bring it to, and so that's super helpful for people to know that they're not one, that their issue is not their singular issue, that there's multiple people having a similar or adjacent issue, and also like understanding what these words are. As the communications director, like trying to communicate 80% versus deeply affordable versus, missing middle versus single family. I mean, people are so protective of their communities and where they are right now. It's really hard to ask someone to like give up what you currently have right now in your hand for what the future might be without feeling like they're going to lose the character and the things they love about the community, and really helping to have these open conversations about what does growth really look like for Tacoma, and can we grow without, I think one of the biggest fears in Pierce County, like does growing mean we turn into Seattle, or can we just grow as Tacoma in the ways that Tacoma needs to grow and still maintain our grit, our integrity, our feeling of what Tacoma is. And I think there's lots of examples of where that has happened, but it's a scary proposition. And so I think telling people how to plug in to keep these conversations going is really, really important. I don't know who can answer this question because I'm not exactly sure what it is, but my friend Christy Lynette from the city asked, how do you think that the Housing and Transportation Index do you think that the Housing and Transportation Index is a good lens and tool for truly thinking about regular monthly costs to a family? We usually just think about rent mortgage, but it's so much more than that. And what would that look like if we talked about it in that way? Bebhinn, you want to start?
Sure, I can take a swing at this. Yeah, a lot of the again, hate to always be plugging the work that I do in a different region, but the point of it is that there is no true one area. It's all interconnected. I would say a lot of the education and outreach opportunities that we see and a lot of meaningful conversations we have with community members is about the broad definitions of cost. And so while I am unfamiliar with this particular index, I would say that something we see pretty frequently is this idea that your transportation costs, your housing costs also include the time spent, the worry spent, the energy that you put towards getting yourself connected to your community, whether that's taking a 45-minute bus ride to drop your child off at childcare before you can head off to work, or whether it's living in a community that is an hour away so that you can make rent, but also get access to a city that has the wage that you need. So it's all interconnected. It's all much more complicated than any economic model can offer us, and that's why it's so important to be listening to community and listening to folks with lived experience. It is, when we think about a connected and livable community, we're absolutely thinking about again, I hate that this is my catchphrase, but apparently I have it, that these invisible costs, these invisible choices that we've made are actually made more easy when the light is shown on them. And so yes, I think this connects actually to what Amanda is talking about of the limitations of 80% AMI and what folks have mentioned in the Q&A is that we really need to be thinking about the whole person's experience as they connect to their community. I also wanted to mention this idea of developing and growing as Tacoma. I absolutely think it's possible. I know I'm the Seattleite in this panel, but I am truly a Tacoman at heart. I long to move home and find community again in my hometown. I think we should take heart in the example that Chris gave us of a community that's working well in terms of transportation and housing connection. It's that level of convenience is possible, that level of interconnection is possible, mixed use, affordable uses, all of those fun planning jargon terms that truly just mean an interesting community to live in. They're all already there in some degree. We just need to be able to strengthen them. So I'm hopeful that addressed your question, Kristen. I am not an economist. Indices sort of scare me away, but
I think that was a great answer. I know, Kenzie, you have to leave us. So do you have any final words that you wanna share with us before you hop off?
Sure, I would just say thank you so much all for having me. It was truly an honor to hear about all the work that these amazing folks are doing, and I'm sure that all of you participants are doing as well. And I can't wait to hear what our community turns out next. So thank you so much.
All right. Be safe. Talk to you soon.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Yeah, I think to your point, Bevin, I think the idea of like that there's going to be some perfect formula, I think it's so organic and it comes out in different ways in different communities. And the idea that I was listening to a podcaster who's, kind of, into like mind, body, spirit stuff. And, but she was talking about like what you need to live a good life really should be based on like your individual like guiding principles. And some people like need no money for clothing. Like she teaches yoga. She's like, I need no money. I have like 5 pairs of yoga pants, 5 t-shirts. I'm good. But I need massages and I need a good gym membership because I have to take care of myself in order to be able to take care of other people. Some people might see this as an extra expense that's not necessary, but for me, it's very necessary for me to do the work I do. Whereas someone else might need to spend hundreds of dollars on suits and ties and shirts because that's what they need to be able to sell the car. And I would never spend $100 on any item of clothing. And so it's like this idea that we kind of put our like, oh, I needed, and I used to joke with my kids, like, well, I have this minivan right now, and this is when they were younger, like I have this minivan because we have sports and we have to go around. I got all this equipment. But as soon as the last one of you goes to college, I'm moving into a smaller car. By the time, everybody graduates, I'm going to be in a 2-seater. I'm not even going to be able to pick you up from the airport. So I don't really know what you're going to do. But like, that was just like my jokingly, but like your needs change as your life changes. And so these like kind of rigid ideas of like exactly what people should be spending on what and all that. I mean, it's really based on people being able to live the life they want to live in the community that they want to live in, and how do we accommodate that as a community. So there's a comment from Elizabeth that says, as a former Seattleite myself, I'd say Tacoma is a far better place to live. As a communications director for City of Tacoma, I gotta say it. And so I agree with you, Elizabeth, as someone who has come back home, I agree. What specific actions or investments would community members recommend to City, Pierce Transit, or other organizations? And I know we only have a few minutes, so Chris, we'll start with you. What would you ask City, residents to advocate for?
To advocate for? So I mean, let's see. There are really so many things. I think fully funding the active transportation plan that's in that the city has is some very good low-hanging fruit to try to expand that mobility gap. It costs quite a lot of money both to build out and to operate a public transportation system to meet those very service levels that we need in order to have have a neighborhood be very transit oriented, but for bicycle infrastructure and for walking infrastructure, that stuff lasts a long time, and it improves the quality of life of so many users, and can also have many beneficial health benefits for the people in the neighborhood, and it can. If we could find a stronger revenue source to help fund the plan that we have on the books, then I think that would be a really good thing. Also, I think that this may be an area where there can be some collaboration between the city and Pierce Transit. In areas where bus service is requested, but really what the idea is to try to build additional systems of mobility. Maybe there could be some partnership and collaboration to invest in the active transportation network as an alternative to potentially fixed route service. And it's not going to serve necessarily everyone, all of those same users, but it might be a more cost-effective opportunity that we could pursue.
Yeah, it's interesting. I noticed like in some other cities, they also have like lanes that are only for buses, and we don't have that in Tacoma. And I don't know if you guys have thoughts on the effectiveness or usefulness of that as an option to make to gain that added benefit of like, yes, this would be a better option than driving.
Right. There's a huge benefit for when you get the transit vehicles out of congestion and into their own lane. That is one design component for the bus rapid transit project on Pacific Avenue, at least between 38th and 56th Street. I think at this point is one section of where there will be exclusive bus lanes in the project. What that does is it shortens the trip time. It improves like the operating speed. It improves the reliability of that service. But it does come with trade-offs. You do have to potentially remove left-hand turn lanes. You have to remove general purpose lanes. And so it is a community discussion, and there are trade-offs for it. Space is simply just a limited resource for the city. So unless you're going to build tunnels or elevated structures, and that adds cost.
Yeah.
So I think that they're great ideas, and I think that a lot of other cities have seen some benefits from expanding bus lanes especially in areas where there is a lot of congestion. And I think that Pierce Transit is really looking forward with that in their system expansion study for bus rapid transit that they have currently running right now, I think through March.
All right, thank you. Amanda, we only have a couple more minutes, but I want to hear what should people be advocating for? What should they be paying attention to?
Yeah, one of the discussions that I have with Pierce Transit is about the lack of access to transit outside of the city of Tacoma. And the expansion of that is so necessary, especially when we talk about affordable housing, because we see a lot of people that are being displaced outside of Tacoma because of the rising costs. But are they really truly saving money if they're, having to move out further and then spend more on a car to get back into the city center? So any advocacy that can be done, to just expand the level of service. And maybe that's what Chris was talking about with the transportation plan. And then the funding of it is going to be so necessary as well. And then, yeah, of course, if this is a conversation that we are continuing to have with our members, and I already gave everybody the plug, if you're interested, go ahead and sign up and reach out to me. But this is an issue that we're working on as well. And yeah, just trying to solidify that nexus. And so people can have this conversation with affordable housing and transit and know that it just goes hand in hand.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bebhinn?
I would say there's a really interesting state legislation on the table right now around transportation. If you're a transportation curious person, definitely take a look at that. There are some potential investments may, again, impact at the state level, but could have really interesting outcomes for Pierce and the Central Puget Sound, particularly around specialized transportation services. There's potentially a major increase in the funding that's allocated for again, those sorts of services that meet the needs of folks who need access because of their age, access because of their ability, the broad kind of community-based and nonprofit-based options that exist right now. So if you're wanting to learn more about that or learn more about how that could grow, that's a great place to start. I also just being curious around the whole system. So transportation infrastructure can only work when all the pieces are working together. We hear a lot from community members around bus stop cleanup efforts, lighting, shelter. It rains here in the Pacific Northwest. I don't know if you all knew that, but having options that are usable throughout the year and either advocating for changes in your neighborhood or taking on that action is one way to make sure that the entire system is working.
Thank you guys so much.
Can had
ahead,
one
Hannah.
more thing,
Mhm.
just because it had come to mind. One of the bills actually that was happening at the state legislature was around housing benefit districts, which is, I think, Chris or Bevin, maybe you guys talked about transportation districts, but this bill specifically would increase funding for affordable housing in transportation corridors in these specialized areas. It's a bill that the consortium has been pushing for, along with other state consortia as well, but it did die this year, and I'm sure this is the second time that we've been working on it, and I think next year will work, but interesting. Housing benefit districts is what it's regarding, and I think the bill is 1880 if anybody's following.
Yeah. Well, as always, this has been an amazing conversation. I could talk to you guys for another 30 minutes because there's still more questions, and I would be remiss if I didn't say one of the ways you can get involved is to follow Home in Tacoma. We're entering phase 2, and there's a lot of conversations that need to be had. And, during that conversation with a view on what is the Tacoma we want to have in the future, because the Tacoma we have currently, it has to change. And there's a way to change and preserve our character and who we are, in a way that still allows us to grow in the ways that we need to grow. And so invite everyone to join that conversation. And you can go to cityoftacoma.org/home in Tacoma if you want more information about that. So, I can keep my day job. And as always, Downtown on the Go is a great place to plug in for more conversations like this and advocacy. And with that, I'm going to pass it back over to Laura and say thank you for having me again for another Friday Forum.
Thank you so much, Tanisha. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, our panelists, all of our participants today, especially those who stuck with us all the way through to the end. And thank you to folks who are watching this after the fact. This was a really awesome conversation. I know I'm pretty stoked about it. We have one more Friday Forum this year. We hope you'll join us on Friday, March 25th. We're calling it Growing a Green Future, Housing and Sustainability. So we're going to dig more into how all of this ties into sustainability, both at kind of that governmental level, but also as individuals. A recording of this forum will be available on our social media accounts. If you enjoyed this conversation, we really encourage you to share it out with friends who couldn't be in attendance today. And last, these events are free to attend, but they're not free for us to put on. So we ask that if you enjoyed today's forum, you consider supporting our work through a donation. You can find more information on our website, which is downtownonthego.org. Thank you so much, everybody. Really appreciate your time, your expertise, and we'll see you again in March. Thanks.